fearing the ouster of Vladimir Putin? Russians drained banks of $1.1 billion. Russia's central bank announced in June that it had withdrawn 500 billion rubles, $5.5 billion, from the country's banks. During the brief departure of Wagner Group director Yevgeny Prigozhin against Russian President Vladimir Putin, the Russians withdrew 100 billion rubles, about $1.1 billion, from banks. According to the Moscow Times, Russia's central bank reported that 100 billion rubles were embezzled during Wagner's campaign, from June 23 to 25. Yevgeny Prigozhin ordered his troops to march on Moscow after Russian troops killed about 30 of his soldiers in an attack on June 23. The uprising ended a day after Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko declared peace between the two sides. Russian business news RBC reported that the campaign during Wagner's strike means the country's need for cash is the highest since it announced a part of the military in September. Russia's central bank announced in June that it had withdrawn 500 billion rubles, $5.5 billion, from the country's banks. A fifth was removed during the 23 to 25 June campaign. The bank stated that the increase in revenue will not affect its financial policy. The ruble has been falling for the past 15 months and is trading at 93 per dollar on July 6, which analysts say is linked to the protests. The ruble is at its lowest level since February 2022, when Vladimir Putin attacked Ukraine. Economist Yevgeny Kogan says the ruble continues to depreciate because of Wagner's protests, according to the Moscow Times. Yes, one of the reasons for the current decline is internal shock. But there is also an important reason: export pressure, said Yevgeny Kogan. Follow this site for the latest updates on Russian President Vladimir Putin. The former officer served as president of Russia from 1999 to 2008 and then again in 2012. Putin served as president from 2008 to 2012 when he was president. He was born on October 7, 1952 in St. Petersburg, Russia. Putin studied law before joining the KGB. In 2022, Russia ordered the invasion of Ukraine and war broke out immediately between the two countries. This attack sparked international criticism of Putin, leading to sanctions and other backlash against Russia from the US, UK, Europe and others. The Russians withdrew 100 billion rubles, $1.1 billion, from banks last month during an attempted extortion by Wagner's military group, according to documents released by the Central Bank of Russia. The bank's monthly monetary policy report, released on Tuesday, shows that 100 billion rubles were withdrawn between June 23 to 25, which coincides with the time estimate of the opposition of Wagner's leader, Yevgeny Prigozhin. Moscow Times. On June 23, Prigozhin admitted that the Russian army had killed about 30 soldiers in a missile attack and ordered his troops to go to Moscow. The protest was announced a day after Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko broke the peace. Although quickly resolved, some observers have described this situation as the greatest challenge to Russian President Vladimir Putin's power. An instructor at Fora Bank's currency exchange office in Moscow, Russia, July 2, 2023. After the Wagner Group betrayal, the ruble accelerated its decline against foreign currencies. Russian business newspaper RBC reported that the money withdrawn during Wagner's departure represented the most important demand for cash since the country. It shows 1/5 of what happened during the 23 to 25 June strike. According to RBC, the central bank said the increase in cash would not affect monetary policy. Newsweek contacted the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Bank of Russia by email for comment. Many economists blamed the Wagner Group's departure from the ruble's 15-month low last week, which traded at 93 against the dollar on July 6. The ruble has weakened since Putin began invading Ukraine in February 2022. A member of the lower house of Russia's parliament said last week that the ruble fell because of funding for the territory of Ukraine, which was violated by Putin last fall. Yevgeny Kogan, an economist and professor at Moscow University of Economics, tweeted that the market is still worried about the value of the ruble, as it is still cheap due to the Wagner uprising, according to the Moscow Times. However, Kogan also agrees with the recent statement by the central bank governor, Elvira Nabiullina, who attributed the recent ruble crisis to Russia's bankruptcy. Yes, some of the current price cut is due to internal shocks. But there is also a fundamental reason: weak exports, tweeted Kogan on July 5. NATO leaders agreed on Tuesday that Ukraine's future depends on the alliance, but did not send an invitation or time to join Kyiv, a project that Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has previously criticized as bad. As Ukraine's resistance against the Russian occupying forces in the country progressed more slowly than Kyiv expected, the leaders met in Vilnius, Lithuania. In its own words, NATO also lost the need to complete Ukraine's so-called Membership Action Plan, MAP, effectively eliminating any problems for Kyiv to join the alliance. Zelensky has previously criticized NATO leaders for not giving them time to join. All invitations or deadlines for entry into Ukraine have been set, which is unprecedented and incredible, said Zelensky, before arriving as a special guest. Zelensky opened the meeting with a strong reaction after NATO chief Jens Stoltenberg said the alliance would send a good message to Kyiv on its way to membership. Shows the divisions of the 31 members of NATO over either setting a date for Ukraine's accession or inviting Ukraine to join directly. Even before Russia's February 2022 invasion, Kyiv was pushing for a quick turnaround with security guarantees. Verse targets Moscow. We reiterate our unconditional solidarity with the government and people of Ukraine who have heroically defended Ukraine. Their country is their land and our common interests. It is the most important and urgent threat to the stability of the Allies and to the peace and stability of the Euro-Atlantic region. When asked about criticism of Zelensky, Stoltenberg said at a press conference, NATO has never sent a stronger message about policies on the path to membership or special support from NATO allies. There is no predetermined time to join NATO, they all have the right and always have, he said. Long-range missiles. Zelensky won another. French President Emmanuel Macron said that after a similar statement by the UK, Paris will begin to provide long-range missiles. The missiles have a range of 250 kilometers, 155 miles, which is almost 3 times Ukraine's previous capacity, allowing the army to attack Russian forces and equipment deep in the front line. A French military center has denied allegations of missile upgrades, saying its use is parallel and that Russia is using cruise missiles thousands of miles away. Germany also announced new aid worth €700 million, including 2 Patriot anti-aircraft missile launchers and several tanks and combat vehicles. Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan on Monday quickly retracts his opposition to Sweden's NATO membership, while also supporting the meeting as he pushes for Turkey to restart EU membership talks with Sweden's vision to join NATO as its newest member. Finland attended the membership meeting for the first time since joining the alliance in April. Agreement. Although NATO members agree that Kyiv cannot participate in the war, they cannot agree on what to do immediately after the war is over and under what conditions. Eastern European NATO members support Kyiv's position, putting Ukraine under NATO's security umbrella, the best way to prevent another Russian attack. Countries like the USA and Germany are more cautious, wary of moves that could bring NATO into conflict with Russia. US President Joe Biden emphasized that NATO should remain united against Russian President Vladimir Putin's attempts to split NATO. "I still think President Putin thinks his success is to destroy NATO, and we're not going to do that," Biden said. Moscow cited NATO's eastward expansion as a key factor in its decision to invade Ukraine, criticizing the two-day summit that ended Wednesday and warning that Europe would face a catastrophic catastrophe first if the war escalates. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov said this issue, Ukraine joining NATO, could be very dangerous for European security, so those who will decide should know this. He said European leaders did not understand that it was a mistake to move NATO military facilities to the Russian border.